All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the budget hearing for Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. I am Delegate Tony Bridges, the chair of the committee, along with Vice Chair Proctor, Delegates McKay, and Delegate Acevero. We are going to hear from three agencies today. We have the Department of Information Technology, Department of Public Safety and Corrections, as well as the Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services. We will begin with the Department of Information Technology, and we'll begin with Mr. Patrick Frink with the analysis.
Okay. All right, you should be able to see my screen. We'll start on the first page, which has the budget summary. And as you can see, there are some pretty substantial increases in fiscal 2022, but they're easily explained. It's two areas in which the department's getting more money. It's general funds for cybersecurity and for major IT projects. Now, since we have lots of agencies and a hard stop at 6 o'clock, I'm going to go ahead and skip a number of things. But if anybody has any questions about something I'm skipping, please feel free to ask them. We're going to go to Exhibit 2 now, which is the MFR indicators. And this has to do with agency services. The kind of things that they are measuring, and they seem to be doing quite well, is how much volume do they have for the services that they provide for agencies, and how quickly are they resolving issues. The recommendation we have about this is that we would also like some MFR indicators about value and cost and things like that to show that they're not just doing a good job, but they're doing it at a good cost. So we do have some narrative recommended with that. I also would like to point out the next on this is that there is that $100 million deficiency appropriation in the dedicated purpose account to help out with the cybersecurity effort. Our recommendation with respect to that is that you adopt some narrative, because we really don't have a good understanding of how they're going to spend it, and for them to explain to us how they're going to spend it, what the priorities are, and what kinds of improvements that we should be expecting. There also was some federal stimulus money that the agency got. And one of the things they did with it, $1 million, is a pilot project for a virtual private network, or VPN. Obviously, with all the increase in teleworking, this is an important initiative. The way it's working is, first, it'll be a do-it-only project as a pilot, and then it'll expand to the rest of state government. And there's some audit issues about that later that address that. And so we just want to mention that to you. Let's see, I think a good one next to talk about is exhibit number 5, which shows the fund sources. And this is a good indication of how DoIT's spending their money. A little bit over half is on operations, and the other half is on the MIT DPF, which is the Major Information Technology Development Project Fund. That's the pass-through money that they use for to develop the major systems that the state agencies are making. That's mostly funded by general funds. The operations is, 42% of their budget is reimbursable funds for the operations from the state agencies. They do also get some general funds and federal funds to support their operation. With respect to the where it goes chart, all I'm going to point out today is that to show you where, this is a common question I've been asked this session, is how much new money is there for cybersecurity with all the problems that we have? So this right here kind of shows that there's $10 million for additional assessments and to close gaps and things like that. Another problem is some of the older hardware is no longer safe and has outdated encryptions. There's $5 million to replace that. And there's also $3 million for some endpoint response and other kinds of tools in order for the agency to use. Another issue that we have, hold on, is, okay, yeah, the department also got some money, about $3 million, and they're going to use this to support the new position of the chief data officer and a chief privacy officer. These were positions that were created in the summer through an executive order. Our recommendation here is just to fund this. A lot of states are doing this, and it is consistent with their mission. I mean, the data officer makes sure there's enough data out there and provides data, and privacy obviously is a key concern of the state as well. So, but we don't really know, outside of what it says in the executive order, what exactly these positions are going to do and how that $3 million will be spent. And so we're requesting some narrative to get a report that they can explain what they'll be doing here. As with other agencies, high vacancies, always above 10%, sometimes above 20%. And this agency has had high vacancies prior to the pandemic. Some agencies, their vacancies have increased in recent years. This is one of those that is historically had high. I'm not going to belabor this very much. We talked about this in the DGS analysis as well. There are a lot of newer people that are hired at a higher step and are potentially getting paid more than some of the more experienced people that are there. Now, this agency doesn't quite have as many hires in recent years. It doesn't have as many, the large position count that DGS does. But this is a phenomenon that's happening in this agency as well. I do on the major IT fund, as I mentioned earlier, it's getting a substantial amount. It's $114 million. There's also $825,000 that the state gets for this fund from resource sharing agreements. And I have an exhibit that kind of shows what's going on with those. See, what these are basically estate assets that the state leases to other organizations or companies and makes a little bit of money off. The most common example would be a tower. And if a cell phone company wants to put some of their equipment on it so that they have a larger footprint, they could rent them. For example, that's like the Sprints and Verizons and T-Mobiles are examples of that. There also are some rights of ways that the state leases out. And so this is a modest but an important revenue source that the state has. And there's an issue about that later. And that's why I brought that up to you. I also like to point out that the budget really has been increasing a lot for the major IT projects. It was about $20 million a decade ago. Now it's close to $120 million. There has been a major investment has been made, and by and large, these are important projects. A lot of legacy systems are being replaced, and this is here to stay. This large major IT program, I believe. The first issue to talk about is going to be about cybersecurity. I'll start with the MFR indicators for cybersecurity. If you look at this green here, that's the endpoints that are getting critical patches. There was a dip in 2021 with that. One of the problems was it was difficult to with social distancing and all those things, it became more difficult to do those patches as quickly. The department has addressed that, as you can see with that. And I'm sure they have a good explanation of what they're doing with that. I will say that it just raised kinds of an interesting paradox. Is it seems as though that there are more adversaries out there and they're getting better with respect to cybersecurity. So the environment is more dangerous. Yet with social distancing, that created obstacles for addressing some of our problems. So I guess part of the question to the department is, what are you doing to stay on top of the cybersecurity patches and those types of issues? Also, let's see, I think there was an interesting audit findings that we have here. These are the Ola audits, and I review these every year in order to see what's going on. And there's some interesting observations. There's a few areas that unfortunately have been high in prior years. The first column shows average findings per year from 2015 to 2020, and then 2021 findings is in the second column. Unfortunately, personally identifiable information is still a high issue. Another one is unnecessary user or file access. The problem there is that if people have more access than they need, if that person's account is compromised, then that gives the adversaries more opportunities to go into and cause other problems. A new one, probably not a surprise, that was used to be very uncommon and most years would not even have a finding for this is VPN problems. It's not a surprise because of all the increased telework that you know this is front and center. There are some areas that are getting better. There used to be almost 5 findings each year about not doing the anti-malware, and now there was none in the last audit. So there is some things. Yeah, and one I really like is the administration rights is down. That's similar, except a little bit bigger, I think, than the file access that I mentioned earlier. So those are some of the interesting observations from the audit. DoIT also surveyed agencies to find out what's going on with their systems. I think for me, the most interesting one had to do this one right here. There still are quite a few legacy systems out there. 40% of agencies are still using legacy systems. A big issue with the legacy systems, and a lot of these are going to be systems in which they're incorporating software that is no longer supported by the vendor. And so there's some vulnerabilities there that need to be addressed. An interesting thing also that happened that I found in the last year is SolarWinds is an IT company. They anonymously, they used another company to survey what some of the current concerns and issues were by cybersecurity professionals. I think 400 or so were surveyed, and that included state, federal, and local professionals. What's really I found most interesting is that kind of the conventional wisdom is kind of turned on its head with this one. Is it used to be the number one threat for years and years, always used to be the careless and untrained insiders, employees that give away the password, or, the phishing and all of that kind of thing. Amazingly, to me at least, is in 2021, just the general hacking community was 40% of them thought, the professionals thought that was a big threat, and now 63%. So that's really up a lot, and that is whereas so it seems as though that this is one way in which the world is probably getting a little bit more dangerous. We may just have more and better hackers out there. They also ask about different solutions that were out there. And what's interesting, I thought, is that usually the thing, training of employees is one of the most important solutions, but it wasn't in the list. What I did with it is I looked at all of the ones in which 75% of the people said this is a key solution. And I just cut it off at 75. And so, and kind of listed them up here earlier. And so another observation that I have is VPN is a lot of people are talking about VPN and the importance of having proper VPN. And we also recommend some narrative for there's a VPN project that the department has, and we recommend that they provide us an update on how that project is going at the beginning of next year. Another thing is there's another trend that's happening is multi-factor authentication. And what that is, basically, that's the thing where when you log in with your password, it sends you like a message back to confirm, and then you have to put, like, say, a 6-digit number in. And that's just a way, it's just another layer. And now everything is vulnerable. There are ways to get around that as well. But it's kind of like, it's kind of getting rid of some of the low-hanging fruit and to try and make it more difficult for these adversaries to do things. And so that's becoming a big trend. And also what I think reinforces the responses is the importance of limiting privilege and access so that people just can do what they can do, so that when there is a breach, that the damage is limited. And part of it really, unfortunately, is there will be breaches. The question is, what are we doing to minimize the damage from those breaches when they do happen? And the final point I'm going to make about this is they asked about expectations with telework. And it starts first with how common was telework before the pandemic? How common was it in 2021? And what does the future look like? And the interesting trend is there will probably be more telework. And this is it's not going to be a bounce back. We're going to go back to having less telework. It probably means in people that are always teleworking are probably going to increase as well. This is just a one-time survey of a number of people, but it does give you a sense of how telework has worked its way into to just the mainstream of how we're working now. There is a second issue. It has to do with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There was some money given for cybersecurity to the state. The way it works is we expect about like 1.6 to 6.4 million over a period of about 4 years, from 2022 to 2025. Of that, 80% has to go to local governments, and 20% of that total has to go to rural local governments. The issue here is that we don't really know how this is going to be spent and who's even going to get this money. It could be the Emergency Management Department, or Do It, I suppose, is going to be involved too. So we're asking for some narrative to explain to us how this is going to be used and what they're going to do with that. And the final issue is I thought it's kind of an interesting issue. And this has to do with the resource sharing agreements. And these were primarily in the past cell phone towers and rights of ways of fiber optic cable were among the most common. Last year, there was the first one we'd seen in at least the decade since I've been doing this. And the MPT tower that's on I-97, what happened is a company, a broadcaster, wanted to rent some space on that tower in order to do television broadcasting. And so what's interesting about it is this really is a growing market. I took a look at some data from Nielsen's and about television viewing households in the 2021 season. And basically, it looks like about 48 million households now have some kind of what they call over-the-air ways. What you can do is you can purchase an antenna. It'll have an amplifier with it, and then you can get a signal from either the MPT or from TV Hill in Baltimore, and you can watch it. Also, what's happening is that with the high definition television that they have now, you can put many more channels inside of what used to be one channel. So channel 2 or channel 9 or 13 or pick 'em can have, I've seen as much as 6 different channels inside that what used to be that one band. And so the broadcasters are realizing this is a revenue source. They're offering these additional channels and services, and more people are buying these things. The issue we have is that when they did the costing of this resource sharing agreement, they basically used the same model as they used for the cell phone towers. Now, cell phone towers usually about a mile or two apart, and the way it's valued is the traffic, the equipment on it, but also the traffic around it, which makes a lot of sense with the cell phone tower because they have such a limited range. But the television and radio broadcasts, the one on I-97, it goes to the other side of Baltimore City and DC. So it has a much larger range. So what we're recommending is some narrative to look at maybe a different kind of a metric for those radio and television towers in the future. And that's my last recommendation. With that, I will mention that there is a lot of information at the end, the rest of this analysis about major IT projects and what's going on with them that you can review at your leisure. And I will conclude my remarks and take questions now.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Frank. Are there any questions from any of the members? Seeing that there are none. Thank you very much again for your thorough analysis, Mr. Frank. We will now move on to the secretary. Mr. Secretary Lahey, I know you have Mr. Chip Stewart and Ms. Melissa Lehman with you as well. If you want to begin, and I don't know if you wanted to introduce them or turn anything over to them to respond to the analysts' questions as well, but the floor is yours, sir. You're on mute. You're on mute. There you go.
If we only had a nickel, we could solve the budget problem for every time that happens. I apologize. So good afternoon, Chairman Bridges, members of the committee. I'm Michael G. Lahey, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Information Technology. As you stated, I'm joined by Chip Stewart, both the state and DeWitt's Chief Information Security Officer. And I do want to thank you for this opportunity to appear and testify today. I'd also like to ask, or rather to thank Patrick Frank, our DLS analyst, for his hard work. It's always a pleasure to work with him. And as Mr. Frank said, there were a number of recommendations. In our written response, we have concurred with those recommendations. And so the committee can go through those at their leisure if they choose to, or we're happy to answer any questions. Before we turn things over to Mr. Stewart to talk about security, I would like to touch on a few matters that Mr. Frank did mention with regard to our accomplishments and some changes over the last year. First, as he mentioned, salaries and position vacancies have been an issue. Working with our colleagues at DBM, we've actually, in our annual salary review, created 22 new IT classifications including a number of cybersecurity positions that are aligned with what's known as the NICE framework. And Mr. Stewart will tell you about that, but I believe we were the first state in the country to actually adopt that framework. One of the biggest changes is we built and now operate our own security operations center, which is available and looking over our networks 24/7, 365, which is very different than the process was before we actually brought this in-house. We have over 10,000 customers on our voice over IP telephone system. The backbone network for Network Maryland now operates at over 100 gigabytes. We have consolidated a number of customer agencies to our centralized data center and built virtualized computing environments. Maryland First continues to have new coverage improvements in our radio public safety system. And there are a number of websites that, if you've looked at any of them, have been significantly upgraded and modernized and standardized to take over for the outdated websites. As was noted, there are a number of legacy applications, many of which are being addressed in the MITDP, our Master Technology Program and Fund. 95% of the projects in that funding model are now modernization projects. And as I said, I'm extraordinarily proud of the hard work and dedication of the employees who do it. Most of these folks only hear from others when things go wrong, and they do a spectacular job. So I want to commend them and do it. And specifically our Office of Security Management have made a number of substantive improvements in cybersecurity over this last year. And I'm going to ask Mr. Stewart to speak about that at this time. Thank you, Chip. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Lahey. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Chip Stewart. I'm the State Chief Information Security Officer. The State Chief Information Security Officer, or State CISO, as you may hear it called, is charged with leading the Office of Security Management, which is responsible for the direction, coordination, and implementation of the overall cybersecurity strategy and policy for all state agencies in the executive branch. As Secretary Lahey stated, we've made some pretty substantial improvements to our cybersecurity capabilities over the past year. I'll highlight some of the major ones that I think are noteworthy for the group, and if there's any questions in the written testimony, I'll be glad to answer those later. So the first is the transition from a contractor-based security operations center to a 24/7, 365 in-house security operations center. You'll hear that called a SOC. And that is the control center for all of our security operations. We have a team of network defenders focused on identifying and detecting threats and attacks against the network. Additionally, we've updated the email system to better filter attempts to send malware and phishing emails. We've implemented what's called a volumetric, I'll explain what this is in a second, a volumetric denial of service and distributed denial of service protection service. So as Secretary Lahey mentioned, the network can now handle 100 gigabit per second of traffic. That came with upgrades to our internet circuits, and that creates new risk for us in terms of adversaries attempting to disrupt our services. This allows us to stop those sorts of attacks. And then one of the ones that we've kept relatively quiet is a service that initiates through legal process takedowns for sites impersonating the state government. And why that's important, because at its face, that might not seem like a big deal. Frequently, criminals will try to perpetrate fraud using unemployment lookalike sites, trying to get people's credentials and convince them to load sensitive data. This allows us to take down those sites, in many cases, before the bad guys even have a chance to try to use it. And that's been one of the capabilities that we showed Mr. Frank when he came on site to see what our operation does. And I'm very proud of that personally. Another significant improvement we made is in the vulnerability and risk management program. So we've improved and increased our frequency of network-based risk assessment for assets on the network, including direct remediation for externally identifiable high-risk items, which has been a major factor in reducing the number of successful cyber attacks against the state. In that program, we've tripled its size in the past 12 months. So we went from around 10,000 IT assets under coverage to over 30,000 now. And we've transitioned that into our IT service management platform, which allows us to better automate these functions, which means we can do more with fewer resources. So being good stewards of the taxpayer money. As Secretary Lahey mentioned, we've implemented a new job classification system for cybersecurity jobs based on the NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology down in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Nice framework. And that's a national initiative for cybersecurity education. What that does is creates a pathway to develop folks in the workforce, both in their work role and into new work roles. By using this framework, we're better able to attract, develop, and retain qualified cybersecurity professionals. Excuse me. Additionally, we've established a threat intelligence and information sharing platform where we're now sharing threat information and vulnerability information with other states and federal partners, enabling us to respond more quickly. Again, this is very heavily focused on automating to keep people from slowing down the process and better protecting us ourselves. And the last major improvement I'll speak to is implementing what we call the Governance, Risk, and Compliance GRC module in Servicenow, which is our IT service management platform. This enables us to better manage security at scale. Again, a lot of focus on more with fewer resources. Another thing I wanted to mention from Mr. Frank's analysis was a decline in the metric related to critical patch compliance. The IT team at DoIT, through the course of the early part of 2020, identified an issue with the process that was used to push out a Windows update, and that required people to come into the office. As you might imagine, we had to make some tough decisions about how to roll that out without disrupting service. As we fix that and continue to fix other things, we expect that that metric will come back on track and perform where we expect next year. So with that, I said a whole bunch of technical stuff. I thank everyone for your time today and welcome any questions you have.
Oh, thank you. Although it was technical, I think you laid it out pretty well for us to understand. So definitely appreciate that. You have a quick question before I turn it over to others. I know we had talked, or in the analysis, they had talked about this, the data officer and the chief privacy officer. Do you have an expectation of what they'll be doing and where they are in, the grand scheme of the organization?
Absolutely. I'll let Secretary Lahey take the first run at it if he prefers. And
thank you, Chip. Yes, you'll possibly recall that DoIT put in legislation 3 years in a row that unfortunately didn't pass for a number of reasons regarding keeping track of and understanding what data the state has, the privacy considerations, and how to best utilize that for the citizenry. So the governor signed the executive order creating both a chief data officer and a privacy officer to establish the governance and policy that will control aspects of our data management within the executive branch. And DoIT will be very responsive and responsible for working with them. As our goal is to create an enterprise where not only is the data secure, but the citizens can feel confident that we are protecting information about them appropriately. So, they have been working on this. The chief data officer, I know, did his first request to assess the status of data in a number of agencies. That is being analyzed now, and as soon as that is completed in their office, they'll be sharing it with us, and we'll be talking about the specifics to implement those policies going forward.
Got it. Yep. Thank you very much. I understand Vice Chair Proctor has a question as well. You're on mute. You owe us a nickel too.
This has just been a personal concern, I guess, of mine. During the pandemic, when people who did not have access to the internet could go to our libraries and other facilities and sit and use in their parking lots and use their computers. I wondered if that caused any additional security concerns for your office.
Well, I'm going to let Chip answer it specifically, but any access to the network by folks that we're not certain of how they're patched or what methodology they're using can potentially create a number of issues. But recognizing that, Chip will tell you about what they do at the SOC to protect against those sorts of concerns.
Thank you, Secretary Lahey. So I think, as I understand your question, a bunch of citizens who may not have internet at home were forced to go. I'll use students as an example, where they have a school-issued laptop but may not have internet at home, so they would go to public libraries to use the internet there, and other citizens accessing state government resources. Is that kind of the gist of your question?
Yes, I know they sit on the parking lots or wherever they have a spot.
So the state government websites, and I'm going to speak technically, but I'll explain why in a second, use what's called transport layer security. So what transport layer security provides is a secure tunnel between the user's laptop and the state website, which means it keeps people from viewing or changing the information in that tunnel. So that's one of the many mechanisms we use to help protect the citizens from potential attacks using state government resources. Is that answering your question, or am I still too technical?
Well, I think you're telling me that you have it under control.
I think that is a fair assessment, and we do a lot to make sure that people can't impersonate the state, because I think that does open up a ton of opportunity for criminals to take advantage, which is why things like that takedown service are so critical for protecting citizens.
And one more quick question, if I may, Mr.
Yes.
Chair. And again, I don't know if this is a fair question for your office, but I know during pandemic and many of the children were online, kids with disabilities, especially those who were deaf or blind, there were many challenges to be able to help them to use the online capabilities. And I don't know if that comes into your office, that kind of issue or not.
Yeah, absolutely, that comes to our office. And as I'm sure you're very aware, a piece of federal law that we call Section 508 requires the implementation of systems so that they are accessible to people with specific disabilities. We work very closely with the State Department of Disabilities and are in the process of reviewing all of our websites and other, accessible databases, things of that sort, to bring them up to a standard that we believe addresses this issue. As you can imagine, there are hundreds of websites, and as we become aware of things that are out of the sequence that we're looking at them, we obviously move them to the head of the line, because that's obviously where people are having concerns and difficulty getting access to data.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Proctor. Are there any other questions from the members? All right, seeing none. Thank you so very much, Mr. Secretary, for you and your staff. And I don't know if you had any closing remarks before we end your hearing.
Just want to thank you. And obviously, if any questions arise, we're happy to address them to the best of our abilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We definitely appreciate it. And that will end the budget hearing for the Department of Information Technology. Next, we will hear from the Department of Public Safety and Corrections Administration and Offices. And we have Mr. Jacob Cash, who is here to give us the analysis. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you just mentioned, I'll be going over the budget for DPSCS administration and offices. This budget allowance includes $170 million in fiscal 2023, which is a 0.1% increase of only $180,000. Today, I'll be talking about a few things. I want to go over what this agency really includes. There's the Office of the Secretary, which includes several administrative units that perform services for the department as a whole, including the IT and Communications Division, which also operates the criminal justice information systems, which are used across the state by law enforcement. There's also the Office of the Deputy Secretary of Operations, which includes operational units for clinical services, inmate services, and security operations. And finally, there are the Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards, as well as the Inmate Grievance Office, which are quasi-governmental agency or quasi-independent agencies in this department. Going straight into the performance evaluation, Exhibit 1 shows that there were no erroneously released offenders from either Division of Corrections Facilities or Division of Pretrial Detention Facilities. So that's a very good thing to see. Exhibit 2 shows the home detention population since January of 2020. And you can see clearly there was a large increase related to COVID-19. It has tapered off, especially quickly tapering off after the judiciary started opening back up. And currently that population is at about pre-pandemic levels. This is a slightly or slightly incorrect graph, but talking about recidivism, the department provided 3-year recidivism rates for the 2016, 17, and 18 cohorts, as well as 1- and 2-year recidivism rates for the fiscal 19 cohort. The trend in 2016 and 2017 was very similar at 37% of individuals recidivating within 3 years of release. There was a slight decline in 2018, and that impact of COVID-19 seems to have continued into the fiscal 2019 cohort. Another issue is relating to the Maryland 911 board. It previously was analyzed in this budget, but it was moved thanks to new legislation that created the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. So that will no longer be appearing in this budget. Exhibit 4 breaks down that $170 million budget between the various units. As I mentioned at the beginning of the analysis, the Office of the Deputy Secretary received $50 million for operations, while the IT and Communications Division is the single largest unit, followed by Administrative Services Unit, which includes departmental HR, personnel, accounting, and other department-wide administrative services. The overall budget change is small in total, but there are large changes in individual items. Most of those are in personnel. There are, however, also inmate medical cost realigning from the home detention unit to the Division of Pretrial Detention because of those relative changes in population. There's also new vehicles being purchased in 2022 and 2023 through deficiency spending and provided in the allowance. And there's an increase in administrative fees related to increased investigations and inmate grievances. There are 3 management consultant studies that are funded in 2023. The Duval case management one is important because, as many of you remember from the previous hearings, DPSCS is not in full compliance with the Hogan v. Duval settlement agreement. They're required, or they are on their way towards reaching substantive compliance, but this $750,000 will help to further that. There's also $150,000 for the pre-release unit for women, which will likely be in Baltimore City. This is just for the planning phase currently. However, that will likely transform into a full capital project in the future. And finally, there is $250,000 for the master confinement study, which helps the department determine future bed space needs. As I mentioned, there's some changes related to personnel. Most of those are transfers from the Division of Correction to the Office of Administrative Services. There's also a reduction in budgeted turnover, so that adds money to the budget. In total, when we look at vacancies compared to the budgeted turnover, there would be about $14 million to fill those vacancies, 174 of them currently, or as of January. And importantly, many of those vacancies are in administrative classifications. This is the administrative agency for DPSES, and these classifications are actually Exhibit 6 breaks it down by which program the vacancies fall under, and most of these units have high vacancy rates. Importantly, the IT and Communications Division, as well as the Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance Divisions, have high vacancies, and they have a high number of projects that they are working to carry out. These high vacancies certainly impact their ability to carry out these projects, and that's one of the issues we'll be going into today. But first, I'll be talking about contraband, which is very high in facilities. And Exhibit 7 shows the contraband units found by the K-9 unit. They increased in 2021 from 2019 levels by over 700%. This is a very large increase. And as you can see in Exhibit 8, not all of this increase is due to the K-9 unit. There's also a large number found through physical searches, which helps to keep the facilities safe. All of these contraband items pose a danger to both inmates and staff, and it's something that the department is responsible for stymieing the flow. One project that they are engaging in to stymie this flow is the drone detection IT project. This was delayed last year, but there is a contract appearing before the Board of Public Works on March 9th. If this is approved, it will help the department to detect unmanned flying drones that are, in many cases, responsible for dropping contraband into facility grounds, and it will allow the department to lower that amount. Related to this issue and related to the delays in that drone detection program is the high number of vacancies, as I mentioned, in the IT and Communications Division. This is not to say that if they had full employment, that there wouldn't be any delays or that they would avoid issues with carrying out projects. However, it's clear that the number of issues they've had are related to the low amount of staffing. The computerized criminal history replacement was delayed and causing $2.3 million in federal funds to lapse because the grant period had ended, as well as many issues with the automated fingerprinting MAFIS system, which did receive an extension on the grants, but required 2 additional full years to go live. This is not just limited to IT projects, but to capital projects. They have 13 vacancies and only 7 full-time staff in their Division of Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance. They've had project delays in almost every project they're carrying out, and many of these are not just important for creating spaces for inmates, but for improving the security and securing these facilities at just a minimal level. It's not good to continue to push these projects into the future and delay the accomplishment of them. Some of them include Some of them include fixes that would reduce the legal liabilities DPSCS is exposed to, for instance, for Americans with disabilities. But also many of these are security projects that, again, with the contraband issue and the drone detection issue, are important to maintaining safety in facilities. Finally, the third issue we'll be talking about today is the medical audit, which was performed on the emergency contract modification issued as a result of COVID-19. To remind you, this was a 33% flat rate increase to the monthly payment. And in total, there was $11.3 million paid under this contract modification. The contract modification lasted for 3 months before it was unanimously rejected by the Board of Public Works, and a new auditable reimbursement model was implemented in fiscal 2021. So for this issue, last year, DPSCS was required, their Office of the Inspector General was required to audit the payments made under that modification, and about $944,000 were found to be unsupported expenses that were either double counted in some cases, or did not have sufficient timekeeping records, or where the rate that was applied for certain items was considered to be too high. Here we're asking DPSCS to comment on those overpayments and how they are correcting those discrepancies. Yes, so the recommended action number 1 that we have for this budget is a restriction of $1.5 million in personnel funds across the department to be used for increasing hiring within the IT and Communications Division and the Division of Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance. This would there is plenty of money in our analysis to increase hiring in fiscal 2023. This is just restricting a portion of that specifically for the purpose of those 2 units. Recommended action 3 is a report on the Justice Reinvestment Act, which we have requested in recent years and helps to determine the cost savings for that reform. Recommended action 3 is a report on recidivism, which I mentioned at the beginning of the analysis, and helps to determine how the department is doing with their inmate outcomes. And finally, recommended action 4 is a report on contraband, which is a large issue right now in the department. There's also appendices that summarizes the reports they submitted last year, as well as summarizing a recent audit on the IT and Communications Division, which found them to be non-compliant on personally identifiable information, as well as an appendix for each of the major IT projects the department is currently undergoing. But with that, I will conclude my remarks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cash. Do members have any questions of the analysts?
Yes, sir.
Oh, all right. Well, seeing none, thank you very much for your analysis. Definitely appreciate it. We'll now turn to Secretary Greene in the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. Mr. Greene, Secretary Greene, always good to see you.
You as well, sir. Good afternoon, Chair Bridges, Vice Chair Proctor, members of the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Robert Greene, and I'm the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today is Sasha Vasquez, our Acting Deputy Secretary of Administration, Rachel Sessa, Chief of Staff, Nigel Roberts, our Chief Financial Officer, Errol Eddings, the Executive Director of our Intelligence and Investigative Division, and Angela Greene, our Executive Director of the Office of Data Development. It's nice to be with you today. We appreciate the work of analysts, the Department of Legislative Services, and Mr. Cash, as always. If I may, Chairman, just start off by thanking all of our dedicated men and women who do the work connected with this particular area of analysis in our department. We appreciate them very much, and they have done excellent work through extraordinary times. While our correctional officers provide the safety and security umbrella that allows all of the services to take place within our state correctional facilities, our non-custody and administrative staff are as critical in keeping our operations moving forward. The DLS analysis contains 3 issues as well as 4 recommended actions. Our written testimony provides detailed responses to each of those 3 issues, and myself and the team are fully available to answer any of your questions. With regards to recommended action 1, the department would respectfully disagree with the recommended action, which would restrict $1.5 million to be used solely to hire IT staff and capital construction staff. When I was appointed by the governor as secretary of this department, one of the first things I did was I immediately acknowledged that there was a need to recruit and hire correctional officers. It was a focus of the budget committee, and it became one of our very top priorities. It's not to say that we didn't continue to hire across every other discipline. We certainly did. But as I've said in previous hearings, the COVID-19 pandemic, the hiring freeze significantly impacted and affected our ability to recruit and hire in administrative positions. Now, the hiring freeze has been lifted effective November of 2021. We are seeing a significant reduction in the spread of COVID-19, and we have significant salary enhancements on the horizon, as well as we fully expect to progress and fill these positions. We have 41 active job postings out right now. I'm asking you to please give us a chance over the next year to show what we can do, the progress we can make, and we would be happy to report back to this committee in any format you deem appropriate. So again, I would ask that you please reject that recommended action. Recommended action 2. The second recommended action was for the department to submit a report on the Justice Reinvestment Act. We concur with that recommended action. Recommended action 3, the department agrees in part with the third recommended action, which is to submit annual reporting of recidivism rates. However, we respectfully disagree in part on the scope of the report. The rationale for our disagreement is outlined on page 6 and 7 of the department's written testimony, and we've also proffered what the reporting requirements should look like, which is underlined at the top of page 7 in our written testimony, but we would be happy to talk about them further. Recommended action 4, the department concurs with the last recommended action, which would require the department to submit a report on trends and contraband fines. With that, my team and I are available and prepared to answer your questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Just a quick question about the drone detection. With a number of new, it's like how contraband is increased. Do you feel like the major contributing factor, or are there other factors that I just think, having that drone detection is going to be really key. And I just don't know how much of an effect you think it might have. But with the way the technology is these days, I can only assume that could be a big part of it.
Well, I appreciate that question and that observation, Mr. Chair, but if I may, I'd like to recalibrate the conversation around the contraband. I would tell you that what we're speaking about is fines of contraband that we are interdicting. We're finding it. That is a very deliberate act that we have put in place. As I have in previous committees, I'd like to invite this committee to please come and visit our fusion center. We have dramatically increased contraband interdiction teams, a dedicated team that is not doing this weekly, they're doing this daily. And we're in week 44 of this very deliberate focus on contraband recovery. So that increase is also representative of what we've found and what we've done. And I think to put a fine point on it, it's the intersection of the fusion of intelligence, information, and the efficiency of operation all coming together in a very concentrated way on areas where we know there is issue. Example, mail. Mail has dramatically, we've seen some increases in the type, the trend, the methodology of how contraband can come in. So taking intelligence, information, and efficiency, moving all those pieces together, we're interdicting more contraband. It's not just evidence that there is more. We have found a considerable more based on a very deliberate effort. Around drones,
Yeah.
absolutely. Your thoughts on that are very accurate. This is a project that's been in play for a number of years since I got here. Again, it's a very complex project to put in place. As we know, we are not going to get the ability to intercept drones with signal and other things of that nature. So there are other factors at play here. This is a very complex contract. We did almost 4 months of demonstrations to get to the bid process here. So yes, we believe that this will be extremely helpful to us. And we have had instances that we would be happy to share with the committee in a site visit to show you how this will work.
Yep, thank you very much. I think we'll definitely take you up on that offer to do a site visit.
Thank you.
Delegate McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. As we're talking about the vacancies, we obviously had some high vacancies in just regular correctional officers. I know that you had done some creative ways of job fairs and digging and finding those people. Do you have anything on the horizon on how you're going to fill these other vacancies? Your team did a great job, and you know, for all intents and purposes, finding these people. Is there anything creative on your horizon to fill these vacancies that we're talking about?
Thank you for that question, Delegate. The answer, to be very direct, is yes. Same type of very maniacal focus. We're going to utilize billboards, messaging, narrative to let people know what we do. In addition to that umbrella of safety and security from correctional officers, we have, again, a very, not to overuse the word, deliberate approach. I believe that, you know, my glass is always 3/4 full, and the team is looking at, while we talk about the great resignation, there is also a great opportunity for us to change the messaging, engage individuals in what is great work from mountain to shore. And we are doing that now. As I noted, Delegate, 41 job postings out now. So yes, and we want to continue to do that. And I know we are going to have progress.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just, I'm gonna switch off my camera here because I'm trying to, driving. I don't want to ensure I'm hands-free, but Secretary Greene, thank you for your report. Appreciate it. I have 2 quick questions. The first one is to Delegate McKay's point. Appreciate the work that you all are doing to ensure that we're attracting, and as I mentioned at our last hearing, retaining good correctional officers, because that's the key. It's not just about attracting folks, but keeping the good ones that you have. Which leads me to my question. I know that there are a lot of specialized correctional officers, those who have been there for some time. And I'm curious whether your agency, whether your department is looking at longevity and retention bonus, to your point around the difficulty in trying to hire, you know, training, onboarding, and the costs associated with that. Is there any consideration, is anything being done around longevity and retention bonus for correctional officers who have been there for some time? I see this as and I'm, you know, feel free to share your thoughts, but I see it as a solution to, one, the hiring problem, certainly not an end all be all, but one of the solutions to the hiring problem, and a solution to the retention problem. I can't speak to the morale of correctional officers. You and the unions that represent the workers can better speak to that. But I imagine that instituting or implementing a longevity and retention bonus will go a long way in raising employee morale, but also addressing some of the concerns that have been shared by members of this committee, myself included, around hiring and retaining correctional officers. I appreciate your department's dedication to that. My hope is that you would work with us to go a little bit further to see what we can do for specialized POs to keep them there. And the second question, and it's real quick, it's you talked about reporting requirements and what your department believes should be provided or handed over. I may have heard you wrong, but can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think this is probably the first time I'm hearing an agency or department, sort of talking about, what information should be shared and whatnot when we or members of the public are requesting that. So if you could just clarify that for me, I'd appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much, Delegate. I heard that your first question very clearly around specialized retention. And if I may, the department has been since 2019, 2020, when I first got here, we offered an incentive bonus to stay. It's a $7,500 or $10,000, I'm sorry, bonus to stay. I can send you the details of that. This is after you were eligible for retirement at 20 years. What we also added to that was certain other incentive pays, individuals that were trainers, individuals that were field training officers, another element of incentive pay. If you maintain your firearms qualification, things that create some special details and specialty functions within our system, we offered incentives there. And I'll ask our team to put that together and make sure the committee gets each one of those, as well as the recruitment bonus of $5,000 and another $2,500 in the difficult to recruit areas of our state. I would tell you that our retirements are down. In our last hiring and retention report, we're seeing a decrease in retirements, which is good to see. We don't want to lose good talent. But we also have a number of folks that again, are not just retirement age as an employee at 20 years, but biologically, we've been an excellent employer. We have staff that are, 60s and have stayed for a really long time. So we're appreciative of their effort. I'm sorry, Delegate Bridges, Delegate Acevedo, I did not hear the second question. It was breaking up.
No worries. I'll just follow up via email, but I'll take a second bite at the apple on the correctional officers and the bonuses. So am I to understand that the department is currently doing longevity and retention bonus? Is that what you're saying to keep the folks? So well, let me ask this. Is there a draft right now for correctional officers to fill?
In terms of individuals being drafted for overtime, Delegate?
Correct.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And we understand that is a huge challenge for us, Delegate. Overtime is one thing. Overtime that is the result of a draft and you being told you are not going home. You must stay to deliver the mission of public safety. That's something I would tell you, I think public safety accepts when we come to the table, but it's very tough on our staff. And we know we need to hire more staff to lower that. So that is a focus, and it's something we track daily.
Right.
And Mr. Apologies, Delegate and Secretary.
Yeah, one second. One second. I appreciate that, Secretary Greene. But to your earlier point, when you talk about like the difficulties the department is facing around attracting and hiring, would you agree that, a longevity and retention bonus for those that have put in time, that are trained and that can certainly, maybe take up more hours, addressing the draft issue, or what have you? I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to understand, how is it that the department is not considering just, as a solution, a longevity and retention bonus for those specialized or seasoned, if you will, correctional officers?
Well, again, Delegate, thank you very much. And maybe I didn't answer your question clearly. We have that in play right now. So if I can respond in writing to you, I'll take our quarterly hiring and retention report. I'll also add to that and give you some detail around exactly what we're doing to make sure that we're all on the same page, if I may, Delegate.
Yeah, right. Okay. If you could do that,
I appreciate that.
Yep,
certainly.
Also, I know, Rachel, I Ms. Hess, I thought I saw you trying to interject there if you wanted to say anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Just to kind of respond, that our information regarding our retirement longevity and incentive program is absolutely, as well as those additional specialized bonuses that the Secretary were referencing, have been included in our quarterly hiring reports, and each and every one of them to include the number of individuals that have taken advantage of these bonuses. So those reports are certainly readily available. And I think the other question, and Delegate, please correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of seeking clarification in terms of what reporting requirement that was recommended by the Department of Legislative Services in the analysis that we were disagreeing in part with. I believe that was the other question, but of course, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, it was. I'm trying to understand what the issue is with the reporting standards. If you could expand.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. And if I may, Mr. Secretary, I think Director Greene is best suited to answer that question.
Yes, Director Greene, please.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Delegate Acevedo, for that question. The recommendations that the department provided, which I believe are broken out more in depth in our written responses, are consistent with the findings that the department had at the end of the JCR evaluating recidivism from 2016 to 2019. The two recommendations are in line with our conclusions and our plans for future reporting that are detailed on page 18 of that report. And they're predominantly, now that the department has fulfilled the historical back question, we've caught up to our recidivism calculation from 2016 to now, and we're now poised to design our annual reporting looking forward and not looking backward. And that means being able to look at what other states are doing, which is what that JCR charged us to do. Most other states do a 3-year cohort. They do a deep dive for the year that they're looking at, which in this case would be FY19, and they evaluate the full 3-year impact of that release cohort. And that is what the department recommended. In our expert opinion, the best way to get a really in-depth qualitative look at the outcomes amongst those inmates. And I think that hopefully will be in line with the goals of this committee. By narrowing the focus to look at one cohort, it frees up our resources to take a deeper look at different aspects of that group. For example, specialization, looking at deeper into the types of offenses that are committed for those who return for new offenses, and jurisdiction-based analysis that is just not volumetrically feasible when looking at 5 different cohorts at once. The second component was taking into the account the initial findings that we saw in the slowdown and impacts to recidivism from the court closures under COVID. Due to the unprecedented changes in the past 2 years, we recommend deferring the initial evaluation of that 2020 and 2021 fiscal year cohort and evaluating it longer over time. Because what we found when we did the 3-year recidivism was that by allowing the data to mature, looking at 2016's outcomes in 2019, enabled us to capture all of those cases that are still pending full adjudication. And we know that the adjudication of these cases for the past 2 years has been slowed down due to court closures. So if we were to rush a similar 2020 and 2021 recidivism snapshot like we did following the format last year, what the committee will receive is an initial capture that is going to be undercounted. And those numbers are going to have to be updated in future reports. So if they're going to be used for performance evaluation and decisions, it's in our best interest to ensure that they're as accurate as possible.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you, Ms. Guarino. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Yep, thank you. Delegate Proctor, Vice Chair Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Greene, it has come to my attention that the correctional case managers or case supervisors don't receive the same paid lunch break as other correctional officers. I called your office to see if you could help me to understand this. Your office redirected me and said that should go to another department, but I would still like to have time with you if that can be arranged to discuss this. If it could, I'd appreciate it.
It's certainly, Delegate Proctor. My calendar is available to you, and I will make sure my assistant reaches out to your office.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the Secretary of the agency? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate you always for being here and taking the time to answer all of our questions.
Right. Thank you and good evening to the committee.
Thank you. That will end the hearing for Department of Public Safety and Corrections. We'll now move on to the Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. We'll have Ms. Madeline Miller to give us the analysis.
Thank you, Chair.
So
everything's on. All right, I think my screen has been shared. All right, thank you. My name is Madeline, and today I will be presenting the operating budget analysis for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. In fiscal 2023, the budget increases by $76.2 million or 30.3% to $328 million, largely due to the addition of funding for general and special fund grants. I'm going to jump forward a little bit to page 5. GOCPYBS is one of the primary agencies that oversees the welfare of children placed out of the home. The number of out-of-home placements for fiscal 2011 through 2020 is presented in Exhibit 2. While the number was 4.4 in fiscal 2020, a 43.6% decrease from the prior year, out-of-home placements rose in 2017, 2018, and 2019. Efforts taken to reduce youth out-of-home placements in connection to the COVID-19 pandemic are likely the source of the decline. Further insight into the state's out-of-home placement trends will be presented to the budget committees in a release of funds letter, but DLS recommends that the budget committees add a section to the budget bill restricting funds in GOCPYBS, Department of Human Services, Department of Juvenile Services, Developmental Disabilities Administration, and the Maryland State Department of Education pending the submission of the 2022 out-of-home placements report. Moving now to the fiscal 2021 and fiscal 2022 budget information. The agency received federal stimulus funds in fiscal 21 and 22. In 2021, GOCPYBS received $1.3 million in CARES Act funds for coronavirus emergency supplemental funding and approximately $400,000 for family violence prevention and services grants. The agency received $1.7 million for this purpose in fiscal 2022 between CARES Act funds and ARPA funds. And another $530,000 in ARPA funds will be available in fiscal 2023. In fiscal 22, ARPA funds are also used to support the Victim Services Unit, the Children and Youth Division, and the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network. For the overview of agency spending, this is shown in Exhibit 3 on page 7. Over 55% of the allowance is appropriated for various local law enforcement grants, including the annual allocation of the formula-based State Aid for Police Protection Fund. These programs total $182.1 million of the total fiscal 2023 allowance, with approximately $122.5 million allocated to SAP grants. The administrative headquarters received over $90 million, or 28%, and the Children's Cabinet Interagency Fund receives the next largest portion at $26 million, or 8% of the agency's budget. Spending for the remaining portions tallies to about 9%. The change in the allowance is detailed in Exhibit 4. General and special fund grant expenditures drive most of the $76.2 million growth. There's a $75.2 million net increase in general fund grants, a $12.3 million net increase in special fund grants, a net decrease of $1.1 million in federal fund grants, and a net decrease of $10.3 million in reimbursable fund grants. I'd like to point out that funding for the agency also grows with the addition of 10 new positions, which will support the implementation of Chapter 20 of 2021, the Public Resources Organizing to End Crime Together or PROTECT program. These positions are fulfilling new responsibilities that the agency has rather than helping to manage existing workloads. The budget grows about $54 million, scrolling down a little bit further on the page, in connection with the administration's Refund the Police initiative, and another $4.6 million for the restoration of funding for the Violence Intervention and Prevention program. This chart is continued on to page 10. Many of the federal fund grants grow by about $45,000. The office reports that this is a projection of federal formula allocations to Maryland for the Department of Justice and Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level. Additionally, the office will not be providing funding to MSDE to support Project Bounce Back, down here at the bottom, a series of initiatives to address adverse childhood experiences and assist children, youth, and families to recover from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in fiscal 2023. Jumping forward to page 15, Exhibit 8 shows that the various state partners in funding for the project. DLS asked that GOCP-YVS comment on the status of the Project Bounce Back initiative and the extent to which the programming and fiscal resources carry forward into fiscal 2023. Further detail about the changes to state grants and federal grants can be found in appendices 2 and 3 of this analysis. Now going back to page 11, general fund grant expenditures grow in the allowance in connection to the Refund the Police initiative as just detailed in Exhibit 5. This initiative seeks to increase funding for law enforcement and for crime control and victim protection services by $500 million across fiscal 22 through 2025. The estimated impact to the GOCP-YVS operating budget across all years is nearly $200 million between general and federal funds, though this figure includes some funds that will be provided directly to other state agencies instead of through reimbursable funds from GOCP-YVS. The office will receive almost $60 million in general funds in fiscal 23, including $8 million for a Police Accountability Resources Fund, as required by Chapter 59 of 2021, the Maryland Police Accountability Act. Funding for victim service providers and state-operated victim services programs totals $37.3 million across the 4 years, with $25.6 million allocated in the fiscal 2023 budget plan. VOCA funding, including the use of $19.8 million in federal ARPA funds for victim service providers, is discussed in greater detail in the issues section of this analysis. Most of the enhanced funding under the Refund the Police initiative is for state aid for police protection funding. SAP funds provide support to local and county police agency operations. This initiative would add $975 to each county's general fund award per sworn officer and $6.46 per county resident. The existing funding and formula growth and the growth from this enhancement are detailed in Exhibit 6. Baltimore City, which does not receive formula-based SAP funds in exchange for the state operating the Baltimore City Detention Center, would receive a flat $8 million grant in fiscal 2023. According to the administration, the purpose of the initiative is to provide needed support and resources to state and local police agencies in their efforts to fight violent crime. The enhanced SAP funding does not appear to target additional resources to the areas in the state experiencing the highest crimes, however. The legislature may wish to consider restructuring the enhanced portion of the SAP funding, so not the anticipated formula growth from fiscal 2023, but the additional funds on top of that, to support, to target SAP funding to areas with higher violent crime in the state, or alternatively to support the Maryland's Comprehensive State Crime Control and Prevention Plan, a planning and guiding document that GOCP-YVS is required to provide to the governor. Exhibit 7 on page 14 shows how the additional funding might be distributed in fiscal 2023 if it would be allocated based on each jurisdiction's proportion of Part 1 crimes reported in the 2020 Uniform Crime Report. DLS recommends adding budget language restricting the enhanced SAP funding to better target jurisdictions facing higher instances of reported crime. And this specific language can be found in the operating budget recommended actions portion of the analysis document. As mentioned previously, the office's personnel grows in the allowance for 10 civilian coordinators for the PROTECT program. Each will be assigned to a high crime microzone within the state. I'd also like to point out that as of December 31st, 2021, there were 12 vacant regular positions in GOCP-YVS. As the office only has 56 regular positions in the working appropriation, this means that more than 1 in 5 positions were vacant. All vacant positions have been vacant for less than a year. I'll now turn to the issues portion of the presentation. There are 3, and the first concerns grant oversight, and GOCP-YVS oversees $317 million in grants across all fund types. I apologize for the typo that appears in the document, including more than $226.3 million in general fund grants. In response to GOCP-YVS reporting $17.2 million in general fund reversions in fiscal 2020, including a significant number of erroneous grant reversions, language in the 2021 JCR restricted funds within the agency's budget to be used for contracting with a private accounting firm to perform a fiscal audit of the agency and its grant management processes. Though the report was due December 31st, the office requested an extension of the report through the rest of fiscal 2022. The office reports that the RFP has been approved, but it's not yet posted as the office intends to hire a procurement officer first. We asked the GOCP-IVS update the committees on the status of the grants management audit, either in their testimony or verbally today. Moving down a little bit further, there we go. Next, the reporting of metrics relating to grant oversight raises some concerns. Exhibit 9 shows the percentage of grants in compliance, the percentage of grants with above average compliance, and the number of grant audits completed between fiscal 2016 through 2021. 2 of these grant performance output metrics were not provided in the fiscal 2022 or 2023 MFR submission, along with several other measures related to grants management. In OPEGA's recently published performance evaluation of GOCP-IVS, which will be discussed in the 3rd issue, the office reports that it has moved away from tracking the performance of its subrecipients in the MFR to the performance and efficiency of its different divisions using various output measures. The office also states that it does not have direct control over the performance of its subrecipients. While obviously GOCP-IVS cannot control its subrecipients, who are independent entities, GOCP-IVS is, however, responsible for directly overseeing whether subrecipients use the funds in accordance with the terms of the grant award agreements. DLS is therefore recommending that $100,000 in general funds be withheld until the office returns to reporting the following grant management MFR measures in its annual submission: the percent of grants in regular status, the percent of grants in risk status audited, the percentage of closed grants with above average compliance with conditions and regulations of grants, the percentage of unused federal funds returned, and the percentage of unused state funds returned. I will note that one grant management aspect the office continues to report on and has seen improvement in over the past year is the number of the percent of grants receiving site visits. This is largely thanks to the office's ability to conduct site visits virtually, although the office also reported placing a higher emphasis on this within fiscal 2021. The second issue relates to the VOCA program, which seeks to provide victims of crime with assistance and services to support their restoration following a violent crime and to help them navigate the criminal justice process. Historically, victim service providers funded through the VOCA program included both non-state providers and state agency providers. Exhibit 11 on page 21 shows that federal VOCA funds, which are awarded annually and may be expended up to 3 years after they are awarded, have declined since their peak in federal fiscal year 2018. The federal fiscal 2021 award was only $18.9 million, approximately 31% of the federal fiscal 2018 level. The 2022 award is expected to be similar to 2021's and will be published in September. In recognition that federal awards to the states had declined and that this could have negative effects on victims of crime, the U.S. Congress passed the VOCA Fix to sustain the Crime Victims Fund Act of 2021, or also will be referred to as VOCA Fix. Part of the VOCA Fix was to allow states to access funds from previously closed federal funding cycles. For GOCP-IVS, this included about $4.5 million from the federal fiscal 2018 award. The agency reports that it also expects federal awards to increase because of the VOCA Fix, but this will take place over the next 3 to 10 years. Exhibit 12 on page 22 shows the VOCA program's expenditures between state fiscal year 2015 through the 2023 allowance. Legislative appropriations and actual spending increased to take advantage of the higher federal fund awards. For the 2020 grant funding cycle, GOCP-IVS offered modified continued funding streams to subrecipients, and subrecipients were eligible to receive up to an additional 10% of funding based on their level of grant funded personnel. During the 2021 session, budget language required GOCP-IVS to prioritize non-state victim service providers over state providers. The language also required VOCA funding to be awarded to individual service providers at a level equal to that of fiscal 2020, creating another year of continuation funding. The 2021 JCR required the office to submit 2 reports on VOCA grant award data and a letter to the budget committees. $1.5 million in general funds from the office's administrative headquarters was withheld for these purposes. Although these materials were provided to the legislature several months beyond the requested submission date, the information largely meets the requirements of the budget language, and DLS recommends the release of these withheld funds. Unfortunately, funding from the federal government to Maryland's VOCA program was reduced by about 37.7% between federal fiscal 2020 and 2021, seen previously in Exhibit 11. In September, the agency reported that it was able to use reserve funds to reduce the fiscal 2022 cuts to 19.8% across all non-state recipients, and by not funding state providers, including the Secretary of State, DHCD, and DPSCS. However, it could not provide information at that time to allow DLS to verify how the cut was applied. In October, a budget amendment was processed which added ARPA funds for GOCP-YVS to fund the non-state providers and for the state agencies to receive their expected funding. This $19.8 million is shown in the rightmost column of Exhibit 13. The total fiscal 2022 award is expected to be about $49.8 million, which is higher, more funds than the $29.6 million currently listed in the governor's budget books, as GOCP-YVS spends these ARPA funds and as it exhausts its reserves and remaining funding from previous federal award cycles. GOCP-YVS reports that it currently has adequate federal fund authorizations to cover the fiscal 2022 and 2023 appropriations after accounting for the future award of federal fiscal 2022 VOCA funds, and provided the office can encumber fiscal 2022 ARPA funds for fiscal 2023. That's for state fiscal 23. The totals column, or excuse me, the totals row in Exhibit 13 demonstrates that there will not be enough federal VOCA funding to continue funding non-state providers beginning in fiscal 2024 at their current level. General funds will then be needed to keep existing providers funded at their current level. I will also note that the office's delays in having the audit of its grant processes performed may have delayed the questions about the VOCA program funding being answered and reconciled to the last dollar. To increase transparency regarding the use of VOCA funds, DLS again recommends adding budget language restricting funds pending the submission of a report detailing the expenditures of the four most recently closed VOCA funding cycles, how changes in the level of funding impact the continuity of VOCA services in Maryland, and a comparison of the legislative appropriation and actual VOCA expenditures for the most recent 6 state fiscal years. The third and final issue concerns a performance evaluation of GOCP-YVS that was recently conducted and published by the DLS Office of Performance Evaluation and Government Accountability, or OPEGA. The performance evaluation observes that the budget of GOCP-YVS and its historical components grew by over a third between fiscal 2017 and 2021, making it larger than 9 of Maryland's principal departments. It also observes that the crime rate in Maryland has generally been falling since the early 2000s. Though the document includes 24 recommendations for the agency, 3 of OPEGA's recommendations for GOCP-YVS are the following. Future crime plans the office creates should include quantifiable goals and metrics. The General Assembly should consider requiring that future GOCP-YVS executive directors be appointed with the advice and consent of the Senate, and the agency should submit all mandated reports in a timely manner. GOCP-YVS is not required to implement the recommended changes, but to the extent that it does, its capacity to meet its complex vision and mission may be improved. DLS recommends the addition of committee narrative, therefore, to require GOCP-YVS to submit a 1-year update detailing its implementation or further response to OPEGA's recommendations and detailing any associated expenditures. The operating budget recommended actions then began on page 26, but are summarized on page 2. As the recommended actions include both budget bill language and committee narrative. That concludes my budget presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Miller, for that thorough analysis. Before I ask for any questions from the members, let me just remind everyone that we do have 11 individuals from the public who are signed up to give public testimony. And I do want to make sure that they have time as well. So with that, are there any questions of Ms. Miller? Seeing none, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We will now turn back to the agency, and we'll hear from the Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services and Ms. Yasim Karaman. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. It's a privilege to testify before you today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Yashim Karaman, and I serve as the Chief of Staff for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services. I've been honored to serve on this team since November. Cameron Edsel, our Legislative Affairs Manager, is also joining me today. Our agency would also like to thank Madeline Miller, the Department of Legislative Services Analyst, for her diligent work covering our office. As many of you know, our office is in a period of transition, and without a permanent executive director, I will be testifying. I want to be respectful of your hard stop at 6, and if there are any questions that I'm unable to answer during this hearing, our office will gladly provide a written response to those questions afterward. The Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services embodies the multidisciplinary and collaborative approach that Governor Hogan has taken to build a safer Maryland. As the very name of our agency implies, our office works to address 3 key areas: crime prevention, working with our law enforcement partners across Maryland to take down violent criminals, providing support for victims tragically affected by crime in our state, and working to make sure our children and youth have the tools that they need to be successful in life. Our Victim Services Unit directly supports victims of crime and organizations that help serve them. We're extremely proud that since 2015, our agency has helped support more than 1 million crime victims. And through our office, Governor Hogan has directed more than $335 million to support victims of crime. The Hogan administration has also invested $227 million in children and youth serving organizations over the last 7 years, including work to mitigate adverse childhood experiences among our younger generation. And that's what taking a comprehensive approach is all about: arresting violent criminals, building up the communities that they've terrorized, helping those that have fallen victim to crime, and constantly working to prevent crime around the state of Maryland. And since Governor Hogan took office, we are proud to have distributed more than $1 billion across Maryland for these 3 key disciplines. Because building a safer Maryland isn't something that can be done alone. It takes an all hands on deck approach. And with that, in addition to the written testimony, which you all have, this concludes our remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll begin with Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. To the agency, do you recall any fiscal year where police or law enforcement were quote unquote defunded in Maryland?
Delegate, thank you for your question. I have to look into that as I don't have the data in front of me, and we'll have to provide you a written response.
Well, perhaps I'll ask it a different way. Has law enforcement, has police, from the state police and support for law enforcement in the state, has that ever decreased or decreased substantially over the past, let's say, 7 fiscal years, not even 10, not even a decade back? Has police been defunded or substantially underfunded in Maryland over the past 7, let's say 7 fiscal years?
Thank you, Delegate, for your question. I do not have the budget book in front of me, and so I do not have the years available to speak about currently, but I am happy to respond back to you in written format.
Okay, well, it was more of a rhetorical question, but the answer is no, it's never been defunded. So it may be a semantics question, but I'm having difficulty understanding what the governor's refund the police initiative, if the police and funding for policing in our state has never been substantially decreased under any Republican, talking about his administration now, or Democratic administration. So perhaps y'all can expand on what y'all mean by refund the police initiative. Who's been defunded that we need to refund folks? Can you explain that to me?
Thank you, Delegate. Again, I unfortunately cannot speak on behalf of the governor and his initiatives. The questions that you have asked, I can provide a written response to, however.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Acevedo. If you could, I know we are short on time and we have a number of folks that are signed up to speak, but the VOCA funding is obviously an area of concern. Can you speak a little bit more about, although the federal funds decreasing, anything we're able to do to make sure we are providing those funds, especially in a timely fashion for the organizations that rely on that funding?
Thank you, Chair, for that question. And I'll start off by saying we do not know what our federal award is going to be. VOCA is a federally funded program. The Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services is a state administering agency of those federal funds. We should know what those funds will be, I believe, later this summer.
Understood. I believe it was last year that, or the governor, I guess, increased some funding from his own budget, from the budget, based on the, I guess, the decline in federal funding previously. Is that the case?
Yes, last year the governor did supply or supplant additional monies in addition to what the federal government gave us.
Got it. Okay. Are there any other questions from members for? Doesn't look like I see any. If not, well, thank you very much for your time today. I understand that you will follow up with written responses for some of the questions that you had today. So thank you very much for being here. Definitely appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, so with that, I know we have a number of individuals that are signed up to speak. And for those members of the public who are signed up to speak, what I'm going to do is call your name. You will have 1 minute to speak. We're going to time you because we are a little short on time, but we're going to try and make sure that we get everyone in. And so the first person that we'll hear from is Lahey Jordan. Hope I'm saying that right, from the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair. My family does indeed call me Lahey, although most people in Annapolis stick with Lisa Jordan. I'm with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I represent the rape crisis centers across the state of Maryland. You're going to hear from some of our service providers, so I will skip what we do, but certainly the name Rape Crisis Center gives you the general idea. The first thing I need to do is say thank you to the Maryland General Assembly. It is because of your budget language that things were not worse during the pandemic. You helped keep things stable. You helped make sure that rape crisis centers were not laying people off in the midst of a pandemic, and you helped persuade the governor to backfill the 20% budget cuts that were imposed. As you've heard from the budget analyst, there is a dip in VOCA fund. GOCAP has represented that they can cover the $50.7 million, and with all due respect, the numbers just don't add up. We're going to get 18.9% from the federal government if we have a continuing resolution, which is extremely likely. It might go up to 24.6 or so if they do pass a budget. That, in addition, we have about $14 million in unexpended ARPA funds and perhaps 4.5 in funds scheduled to be returned for 2018. That leaves us with $13.3 million, a shortfall. I mean, so maybe there's some deobligated funds, but I really urge this committee to look very carefully at those numbers because I think we are not going to have enough money. And the state of Maryland should not abandon crime victims. The GOCAP budget has a general fund increase of 30%, $76.2 million, a 50% increase in state aid to police. That's $46 million. Okay, there's an increase in crime. This is part of the administrative solution, but for each crime against a person, there's a victim the government has failed to protect. Please help us fill that gap. We are not going to have enough money to do what we need to do for rape victims, child sex abuse survivors, victims of sex trafficking. Please help us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We definitely appreciate your time and for your testimony today. Definitely appreciate you. Next, we'll hear from Robin Murphy with Disability Rights Maryland.
Thank you, Chair Bridges and other committee members for letting me testify. My name is Robin Murphy. I'm the Executive Director for Disability Rights Maryland, formerly known as the Maryland Disability Law Center. We are part of a national network of protection and advocacy agencies created by Congress over 40 years ago in response to nationwide horrific abuse and neglect of children and adults with developmental disabilities and mental illness warehoused in institutions. I would like to tell you after 40 years that we no longer need to focus on abuse of people with disabilities. However, the need for our services remains great and far higher than our capacity. Per the CDC, in 2019, the rate of violent victimization against persons with disabilities was nearly 4 times higher than the rate for people without disabilities, and even greater for people with cognitive disabilities. For the past 5 years, DRM has received VOCA funding from the Office of Justice, Youth and Victim Services to serve victims of abuse with developmental disabilities. We employ 2 full-time experienced advocates with significant expertise in serving survivors of abuse with developmental disabilities. Just this past year, our project screened 2,043 reports of incidents of abuse and neglect and deaths, performed preliminary follow-up, 436 incidents to ensure people were further safe from harm, provided advocacy services to 70 individual clients, referred 99 people to VINE, and requested 40 investigations by the Office of Healthcare Quality. Many of those investigations lead to citations of facilities. I echo the comments or repeat the comments of Lahey Jordan and ask you to please support the current VOCA funding that we've been receiving and our other agencies have been receiving to keep.
Thank you very much, Ms. Murphy.
You're welcome. Thank you. Please support the funding.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate your time and your testimony today. We'll now turn to Amanda Rodriguez from Turnaround Inc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Amanda Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director of Turnaround, the Rape Crisis Center for Baltimore County and City. We're also a comprehensive domestic violence provider. I just wanted to discuss briefly how terrifying the last couple of years has been as a victim service provider. The level of violence has increased exponentially, as have the number of survivors that need assistance. We have seen a double in terms of the amount of survivors that are reaching out via our hotline, and double the amount that we normally spend in crisis beds are currently being spent to support those survivors. That's the exact program that would be cut if we lost VOCA funding. So any amount that we lose, it is one less survivor that we can serve. And if you know anything about victim service providers, especially rape crisis centers, we always try to show up no matter what. But unfortunately, that means that the staff are then asked to do more, this is just not the time to do that. I know that both MACO and the Maryland States Attorneys Association support additional funding, and we are asking for you to continue that support. Just to mention briefly, there was one father actually who reached out to us the last week. His daughter has severe developmental disabilities and was raped, and he specifically discussed the support that he got via the helpline that his daughter got while she was in the hospital, and then the continued crisis response therapy sessions that she received both virtually and in person. This is a real thing that affects all of our community, and we certainly ask for you to continue funding necessary victim services here in the state of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate your time and your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Renee Battle Brooks, Prince George's County Human Trafficking Task Force.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am the Executive Director of the Office of Human Rights for Prince George's County. We are the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. The task force sits under us. We have lots of partners on this task force, lots of NGOs that rely on funding to provide those direct services. Very particularly as relates to children, a 2017 report by the Department of Health and Human Services stated that up to 90% of children who were victims of child sex trafficking had been involved with child welfare services. We know that children who receive child welfare services have experienced issues that make them vulnerable to human trafficking. So cutting the VOCA funding for these vital programs for children decreases the intervention services and increases the likelihood of more human trafficking victims. In a recent survey done by our partners on the task force, the number one identified issue was deficit in resources. The continued support of human trafficking victim survivors through VOCA funding is critical, and we urge that funding we're actually urging that funding be increased to best support children and adult victims of crimes, and by extension, the Maryland community as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and your testimony today. We'll now hear from Michelle Williams, Community Crisis Services, Inc.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. I'm Michelle Williams. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Community Crisis Services in Prince George's County. Community Crisis Services operates the only domestic violence safe shelter program in Prince George's County, which, as I'm sure you all aware, Prince George's County has led the state in a number of deaths due to domestic violence in the past few years. Over the course of the pandemic, we have seen, as other programs have expressed, about a 30% increase in the number of victims who need safe shelter. And we currently are operating within an overflow status because of that. The VOCA funding that we receive provides for the maintenance and upkeep and staffing and support for our main facility, which is a 43-bed facility. Any reductions in that funding will not allow us to continue to serve the individuals and families that truly need that safe shelter bed to get to be able to leave their abusive situation. I encourage the committee to support the continued funding and advocate for increased funding to meet the needs of domestic violence victims, human trafficking victims, and other crime survivors in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. Thank you for being here and for your testimony today. We will now hear from Lisa Doherty, CASA Inc.
Hello, my name is Lisa Doherty. I am from CASA Inc. here in Washington County, Maryland. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and the members of the committee for allowing me to testify today. I'm going to echo some of the same words that you've already heard. We are also a comprehensive center serving both victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. We as well have seen numbers rising at an exponential rate and looking to serve even more victims than ever before during and post-pandemic right now. We are facing a dire situation for survivors if we do not have at least level funding, and obviously we are looking for increased funding to continue to serve the individuals that we are serving here in Washington County. This increased request for these vital services is ongoing, and we as a community here in Washington County stand together and ready to serve each survivor in any way that we need, just like you're hearing from all of the other counties in Maryland. Cutting funding even slightly in any way would jeopardize our commitment to each survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence, and the suggested drastic cut that we're looking at would almost eliminate our ability to provide uninterrupted services to these providers. Without this funding, we would have to cut positions, and that would greatly decrease our ability to provide advocacy service and our 24-hour response to local hospitals and man our 24-hour hotline. We as a rural community rely on these funding sources to continue this important work, and we look to the future with hope that funding will be provided to continue the fight to end sexual violence and domestic violence. Thank you so much for your time and your continued support on this matter.
Thank you very much for being here and for your testimony as well. We will now turn to Melanie Shapiro, Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Melanie Shapiro, the Public Policy Director with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. We're the State Domestic Violence Coalition. First, I'd like to thank you as well for your actions last legislative session. Those actions helped stabilize victim services funding until today, as well as the legislative actions you took to urge the governor to give some ARPA dollars in October that have kept victim services open. You have heard about the VOCA issues. You've heard about the time that it's going to take for the funds to be replenished. And without action and state dollars, programs are currently facing up to 60% cuts to funding without the state intervention. And this comes at a time when domestic violence is increasing. It's increasing in the number of victims, increasing the level of violence, and increasing in the complexity of cases. Some of the testimony you've heard today are from the domestic violence programs that the network represents. And we are hearing this all across the state. It is the same story. There are more victims, there is more need. And to the credit of all of the programs, they continue to go above and beyond to meet those needs. However, the situation is very dire. In 2021 in Maryland, there were 58 domestic violence related deaths. This is the highest number since 2007. And we now have at least 47 children that have been identified that were left behind. Some lost one parent and some lost both as a result of domestic violence. And this funding crisis is coinciding at a time when the state has an unprecedented amount of surplus dollars. I'd also like to sort of follow up on what the questions that Delegate Acevero was asking before. There is also $500 million in the budget for this Refund the Police initiative to be spent over 3 years. However, as I read the dollar amounts, none of them are going to the nonprofits that provide the services to the victims of the violent crimes. So they're not the ones that provide the emergency shelter. They don't provide and help victims secure long-term housing, and they don't answer the hotline in the middle of the night like the programs that you've heard. So for all of those reasons, I'm asking that you consider the overwhelming need as you make your budget decisions and support ongoing and increased funding for victim services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shapiro. Thank you for being here as well and for your testimony. We also have signed up to speak, but I'm not sure if they are here. Pamela Brown, Garrett O'Day, Sarah Mickey, or Liz Park. Do not see or hear from any of them. All right, if that is the case, let me just once again thank you all for your testimony. We appreciate you being here. More importantly, we appreciate the work that you do as well. So thank you for your testimony and being here today to talk to us about the need for the funding as you see it as well. So with that, we will end the public testimony for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, and that will end our budget hearing for today. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.